I was standing in the parking lot of a Trader Joe's in Naperville, Illinois, holding a reusable bag in one hand and my phone in the other, when I saw what my ex-husband's new wife had posted on LinkedIn. Not Facebook, LinkedIn. Like she wanted the entire professional world to witness it. The post was tagged to the grand opening of their new consulting firm, the one built on a client list that I had spent 4 years developing, and it read, "Grateful for a partner who finally has someone who matches his ambition. Some people are content to coast. We are not." She had used a photo of the two of them standing in front of the office door. The lettering on the glass read Ashford and Keene Consulting. His last name, her last name. The hyphen between them looked like a weapon. I stood there long enough that a woman with a cart full of groceries had to go around me. I didn't move. I just read it again. Some people are content to coast. I knew exactly who that was about. I put my phone in my pocket, got in my car, and sat there for a minute with my hands on the wheel. Then I opened LinkedIn again, liked the post, and left a comment. 3 words, congratulations, check everything. Then I drove home. Let me tell you something about the 4 years before that parking lot moment. My ex-husband, I'll call him my ex-husband because that's what he is and what he was for the last 18 months of our marriage, even if the paperwork hadn't caught up yet, had started his consulting career out of our second bedroom. I was the one who converted it. I bought the desk from a guy on Facebook Marketplace for $40, sanded it down, painted it white. I bought the filing cabinet. I set up the LLC. I was working full-time as a project coordinator at a regional architecture firm, and I was doing it on lunch breaks and after hours because he said he needed to focus on building the client pipeline and couldn't also deal with the administrative side. So I dealt with the administrative side. I built the client database in a spreadsheet that eventually became a CRM tool I paid for out of my own checking account. I drafted the engagement letters. I tracked invoices. I sent the follow-up emails when clients were slow to pay. I sat next to him on the couch on Sunday evenings going over the next week's schedule while he ate chips and told me what he needed me to prioritize. His father, I'll call him my father-in-law even though I've since learned he never actually thought of me as part of the family, had given him the seed money, $50,000. He told me it was a loan. He told me later during the divorce that he had always considered it an investment in his son's future, not our future. That distinction mattered a great deal, apparently. His father is a man who golf claps at things and calls it enthusiasm. He had a habit of looking just past my ear when I spoke, as though the wall behind me was more interesting. I had chalked that up to personality. I understand now it was something else. The first client came through a contact of mine from the architecture firm. I had worked with a real estate developer for 2 years on a commercial project, and when my ex-husband said he was trying to break into the commercial real estate consulting space, I made the introduction. That developer became their first retainer client, $4,800 a month for 2 years. The second and third clients also came through people I knew. By year 2, the firm had 6 ongoing retainers and a pipeline of project-based work. My ex-husband hired his first employee. He started talking about office space. I started noticing other things. The new employee was young, maybe 24, with the kind of easy confidence that comes from never having had to build anything from scratch. She laughed at everything he said in a way that made the air in the room feel different. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself that a lot of times about a lot of things. I was wrong that many times. It took another 8 months before I stopped being wrong. The moment of clarity came on a Tuesday afternoon in March when I picked up his jacket from the dry cleaner. Because I also did that, I also made those appointments and picked up his dry cleaning and scheduled the car maintenance, and found a receipt in the inside pocket for a dinner at a restaurant I had never been to. The receipt was dated a Saturday night when he had told me he was in Indianapolis for a client meeting. I didn't say anything right away. I'm not a confrontational person by nature. I'm the kind of person who processes things slowly and quietly, who needs to sit with information before I know what to do with it. I sat with it for 3 weeks. During those 3 weeks, I made copies of everything I had ever contributed to that business. Every email, every spreadsheet, every contract I had drafted, every CRM record, every client introduction I could document. I saved it all to an external hard drive that I kept at my mother's house in Joliet. When I finally said something to him, he didn't deny it for very long. He said he hadn't known how to tell me. He said they had a connection he didn't expect. He said the word connection like it was something that had happened to him rather than something he had chosen, repeatedly, over the course of what turned out to be almost a year. She had been employee number 1. I moved out in April. He had his lawyer contact my lawyer in May. The divorce took 14 months. His father inserted himself early and aggressively. He called me directly, twice, before my lawyer told him to stop. The first call was to tell me that the firm was his son's creation, and he expected me to be reasonable about that. The second call was to suggest that I had never been right for his son, and that perhaps I might consider this a blessing in disguise. I considered a lot of things. That was not one of them. My lawyer was a woman named, well, she told me I could call her whatever I wanted because we were going to spend enough time together that formality would get exhausting. I called her by her first name. She was methodical and unhurried, and she had a way of reading documents that made her look like she was listening to them. She read our original LLC operating agreement very carefully. She read it again. Then she looked up at me across her desks and asked whether I was aware of the clause on page 7. I was not aware of the clause on page 7. I had helped draft several early versions of the operating agreement, but the final version had been handled by his father's attorney, and by that point I was busy being a full-time project coordinator and a part-time business administrator and a full-time wife, and I had signed where my ex-husband pointed. The clause on page 7 stated that any spouse who had made documented operational contributions to the firm during its first 3 years of existence, which had been included at the insistence of my father-in-law's attorney, apparently as a formality that no one expected to matter, retained the right to request an independent financial audit in the event of dissolution of the marriage. My lawyer tapped the page once with one finger and said, "Do you have documentation of your contributions?" I thought about the external hard drive at my mother's house. "Yes," I said. "I have documentation." She asked how thorough it was. "Thorough," I said. She nodded. She had a very particular nod, the kind that meant she was recalculating something. Then she asked me how aggressive I wanted the audit request to be. I told her I wanted it thorough but not punitive. I wasn't interested in burning anything down, I just wanted what was fair. She said she understood, and that we would start with a standard request and see what the auditors found. The auditors found quite a bit. The new wife. She had married him 6 weeks after the divorce was finalized, which answered some questions about the timeline, had taken over the operational management of the firm when I left. She had a background in marketing, not finance, and it showed. The expense accounts were categorized in ways that made very little sense unless you were trying to obscure something. There were vendor invoices that didn't match any corresponding services. There were payroll records with a consulting contract for an LLC that, when traced back through the Illinois Secretary of State's business registry, turned out to be registered to a family member of hers. There was also the matter of the original client list. Her LinkedIn post about building the firm from nothing had been liked by several of those original clients. The ones I had introduced. The ones whose contact information I had sourced, whose relationships I had cultivated, whose first meetings I had scheduled. She had, in the post, described the firm's client base as having been built through relentless relationship work and a commitment to excellence. My lawyer forwarded me the post when it came up during the audit process. She attached a single line of text that read, "I thought you might want to see this." I had already seen it. I had liked it and commented 3 words. She said, "What did you comment?" I told her. She was quiet for a second, and then she said, "Perfect. I want to be clear about something. I did not set any of this in motion out of anger. I want to be careful about that, because anger is easy to claim and easy to understand, and it would make a more satisfying story if I had been strategizing from the beginning. If I had been cool and deliberate like someone in a movie. The truth is more ordinary. I was hurt for a long time. I was tired. I had put years into something, the marriage, yes, but also the business, which for me had been inseparable from the marriage, and I had watched someone else step into the life I had built without any acknowledgement that it had been built. The clause on page 7 wasn't something I had been holding in reserve. I didn't even know it existed. My lawyer found it. The documentation existed because I had needed it emotionally, not strategically. I needed to be able to point to something concrete when the grief got abstract and formless. Needed to be able to say, no, I did do that. That was real. I was here. The audit happened because I wanted what was fair. What it turned up was something else. The audit took 11 weeks. During those 11 weeks, I went to work every day, came home to the apartment I had rented in Evanston after the separation, took long walks along the lakefront, and tried not to think about what the auditors were finding. I had a standing Thursday dinner with my youngest sister. She drove in from the western suburbs, and on most Thursdays she was the one who made me laugh about things that weren't funny. She had been the one to drive to my mother's house and retrieve the external hard drive when I first asked for it. She had shown up on that Tuesday night with the drive and a rotisserie chicken and a bottle of wine, and had not asked me a single question I wasn't ready to answer. She knew. She had known before I did. She is also the one who, when I showed her the LinkedIn post, said very calmly, "She's about to eat this." I said I hoped she was right. She said, She called herself a real woman on LinkedIn. She's going to eat this. The final audit report ran to 46 pages. The highlights as my lawyer walked me through them. 18 months of misclassified expenses totaling just over $62,000. A consulting contract paid to a third party that could not be verified as providing any actual services, totaling $31,000 over 14 months. Client acquisition records that clearly showed the originating introductions had been made before the new wife joined the firm, and in several documented cases, had been initiated by contact methods tied directly to my personal professional network. The third party with the unverifiable consulting contract was, as the auditors had flagged, her younger brother's LLC. The CPA who had signed off on 2 years of the firm's tax returns had made representations to the IRS that were inconsistent with what the internal records showed. My lawyer said, "We can go several directions here." I said, "I want what's fair. I don't need to bury anyone." She said she understood, and that what was fair, given the documented contributions and the audit findings, was a settlement that included the return of all misclassified funds that could be traced to the operating period during which my contributions had been active, plus compensation for the client relationships I had originated, plus legal fees. The total came to $214,000. My ex-husband's father had to co-sign the settlement agreement because he was a partial stakeholder in the original LLC. I will never forget his attorney reading that clause back to him on the phone call, which my lawyer let me listen to on speaker. His voice had that particular quality of a man who has never in his life had to reckon publicly with a mistake. He had to reckon. In writing. The new wife took down the LinkedIn post 4 days after the comment I left. She blocked me the same day. By then, of course, the auditors had already been working for 3 weeks. She didn't know that a 3-word comment could do that. She didn't know that congratulations. Check everything had been the sentence that made my lawyer look at that post and forward it to the audit team with a note about the public claims being inconsistent with the internal records, a note that ended up in the formal documentation. She had wanted the world to see her success. She had gotten the world to look very closely. The settlement was paid in full within 6 weeks of the agreement being signed. My ex-husband's new consulting firm is still operating, smaller now, and I have heard from a mutual contact that several of the original retainer clients have not renewed. I don't know whether that's related. I try not to follow it. His father stopped calling my mother when the settlement was finalized. My mother said she hadn't missed the calls. My sister and I had dinner to celebrate. She ordered the expensive fish. I let her. People ask me sometimes, when I've told this story in pieces to friends, to my sister's friend who was going through something similar, what the lesson is. They want there to be a clean takeaway, something that fits on a coffee mug. I don't have one of those. What I have is this. I kept records because I needed proof that I existed in that life. I needed to be able to say to myself, if to no one else, that I had done the work and it had been real. The records became useful later, but that wasn't why I made them. I made them because grief needs something to hold on to, and I held on to the paper trail. She posted on LinkedIn because she wanted to be seen as someone who had built something remarkable. She wanted the credit, and she wanted it publicly, and she wanted me to see it. She got seen. Just not in the way she intended. I drive past that Trader Joe's sometimes. I don't think about it much. But when I do, I remember standing in that parking lot, and I remember the specific quality of the afternoon light, and I remember thinking, before I even knew what I was going to do, that I had been quiet for a very long time. Some moves don't make noise until they land.